Hi, I'm Roger, and today we're going to be building frames for hives, hive frames that is, for beehives. I promised to do this. It's been a little while. Things have been a little hectic. I've been making some Christmas gifts and trying to get stuff going here in the wood shop for those, and trying to do finishing and not get dust on them. And yeah, it's been a little bit of a challenge. One of those things you plan on doing early in the year and you don't do it, and then you kind of get down to the last minute. Anyhow, back to the frames. This is going to be a two-part series. This is the first part where we're going to make the end bars. And what I have here is a bunch of construction scraps I've picked up. You can use about any kind of wood, with certain exceptions. You obviously don't want to use any treated wood. This here, these white ones here, this is probably spruce. These are Douglas fir. They're cut-offs and cutouts from some floor joists on a house that was being built. You can also use western red cedar, which is, obviously this is not big enough for that, but an example of what cedar looks like. Or you can use eastern white cedar. What you do not want to use is eastern red cedar. This is also called aromatic cedar, and it's used in cedar closets and cedar chests. And it's actually not a cedar at all. It's actually a juniper, but it's commonly called eastern red cedar. What I'm going to be making in this video and showing how to make are the end frames. This is for deep, this is for a medium. I don't run shallow, so I don't make any shallow frames. And when I make these, I run them as a batch. We can also get into the debate about whether or not it's economical to do it yourself. You can buy frames if you're buying lots of 100 for a little bit over $1 a piece. Yeah, if I had a couple thousand frames I needed, I would buy them and probably put them together that way. But I do like working in the wood shop. I kind of liken it a little bit to fishing. I like to fish. I've probably got, well, I know I got at least $10,000 in a boat, more fishing poles than I can count. My wife yells about constantly about what I'm going to do with them all. And yeah, I could go to the store and buy fish and cook it up that way and probably be way ahead, but that's not the point. I like to cook. I do like to cook. I like to fish to relax. I also like to work out here in the wood shop to relax. It's a little bit of an off season for us with our nursery business and our greenhouses. I am retired from 42 years in the electrical field, so I have plenty of time. I don't have anywhere to be, and I can spend my time out here enjoying myself building these. So we're not going to get into the economics of how much it is per hour. Now, if you do have to go out and buy all the equipment to do this, you will definitely be way ahead to just buy them already cut and then assemble them yourself. I already have a pretty substantial workshop of things I've accumulated over the years. I've got planer, joiner, table saws, crosscut saws, miter saws, and probably more routers than anybody needs, but that's just the kind of thing I have about routers. I don't like changing bits, I just swap routers. Anyway, here I'll get set up a little bit and we'll get on with, I'll show you how to build these frame ends. Okay, here's a little shot of the back of my saw. I know some people have a little bit of a concern about when I'm adjusting heights and messing with blades and changing blades that you don't see me unplug the saw. Here's the reason why. Right here is the start-stop switch, and it would be very difficult to accidentally bump the start or the on button. The same thing holds true for the router part on the other side of the table. This all goes down to this box right here that I built. And what I do usually is I will kick that button right there. That's an emergency stop button. And what that does, it disables everything. So if I were somehow to accidentally hit the on button, it would do nothing. And the same thing holds true for the router on the other side. It has the same type of switch. And I suppose you're curious to how this works. What you see on the front here, well, I got my crosscut saw plugged into that. There's a GFCI receptacle on here. This thing is fed with a 240 volt 30 amp circuit, which is this big black cord you see here on the floor. And inside of this box Okay, here's a little bit of a view of the inside. There's 3 circuit breakers in there. Each one is at 15 amps. Therefore, one's for the dust collector that's built in, one's for the router table, and one's for this outlet that's on the front of the panel. What you see there on the right hand side is what's called a magnetic starter. Yes, it's a 3-phase starter, but I'm using a single phase. That protects the saw motor, which is 3 horsepower, 240 volt. The relay you see at the bottom is the relay for the router table, and it also operates the dust collector. So whether the saw is started or the router table is started, it will automatically turn that dust collector on. And of course, while we're on this end, I got a little place I built here for storing, my micro jig and some table inserts and my arbor wrench and a few miscellaneous tools. And I can store my blades over here on this side, my miter gauge over here on this side, and the piece of plywood you see over that next to the gauge wheel for the angle is there to block off airflow. The base of the saw has a chute on it that's connected to my internal dust collector, and I'll get into the whole thing on the saw some other time on a little bit of a shop tour, but just want to alleviate anybody's safety concerns. When you see me messing around with the blade and stuff, I usually just kick that button right there with my foot while I'm doing it, and then I'll pull it back out like this when I'm ready to go. And then when I want to start the saw, okay, got the planer set up behind me here. We're going to get to that in a minute. A couple of little things that are handy to have. Get yourself a digital caliper. You don't need an expensive one. This one here is a Digite or something. Yeah, they're made in China. It comes from Harbor Freight, or I should say Harbor Freight. We're not building a space shuttle here, so this will be accurate enough for what you're doing. Another thing that's handy to have, whether you're setting blade height, dado height, or router bit height, is a depth gauge, or I should say a height gauge. This is made by Wixie. They're available on Amazon. They're not really expensive. Just remember to turn them off or you'll end up with a dead battery. Okay, what we need here first, this portion of the frame up here has to be 1 3/8. That's 1.375 decimal. A 2x4 or 2x6 or whatever you're using, it's interesting if you start checking them out as they come from the factory, because they're not all 1.5 inches. They'll vary a little bit both ways. The planer here will take them all down to 1.375, and that's what I'll do first, is run all these through the planer. course, what you'll want to do if as you're doing this is to check them with your caliper so that you do get down to the 1.375. I had one there that was much fatter than 1.5 inches. I actually had to back the planer off a little bit to even get it in. But what you're wanting to do is take an 1/8 inch off to get yourself down to 1 3/8 inches. So after I run these through, I'll be back and we'll go on to the next step. Okay, with everything planed down to the 1 3/8 inch thickness, got a pile in front of me here. I actually have some more over on the other side, but this will be plenty to start with here. The next step would be to cut these blocks to length. If you're making deeps for brood boxes or deep supers, the length will need to be 9 1/8 from here to here. If you're making mediums, it needs to be 6 1/4 from here to here. There's different ways to do it. I could put my crosscut sled on here and cut them on that way, or I could use my chop saw. I'll probably use my chop saw, aka miter saw, since it's already set up and I don't need to go get the crosscut sled that way. So I'll get these cut to length for how many I need, and we'll be back. Okay, next step here is going to be to cut the dados in the ends. And we're looking at this end right down here. This needs to be 3/4 of an inch wide and centered. It also needs to be 3/8 of an inch deep. So I've got actually I use a 7/16 dado in there for 2 different passes, and I'll explain why here in a minute. And this needs to be 0.375. And there we go. So we got the height set. Next I will need to set the fence. What I want here is 5/16 of an inch from my fence to the outside curve of the dado on this side. Reason for that extra width there is because once we make this cut down here, which will be in the next step after we do both of these dados, when this sits down and we're done, after we plane this little section out here, and I actually do that on the joiner, and I'll be showing you how I do that. This leaves this here point to be a quarter inch. This in here will be exactly 3/4 of an inch wide and 3/8 of an inch deep. We're doing the bottom slot. After the first pass, you turn it around and go back the other way. This is where you need to double check. Now I've got a 0.70, I need to have 0.725, so I got to move my fence over just a hair. That was actually a hair too much. That will still work. That's why it's always good to make a test cut, and on your first couple cuts, always make sure you measure. Run another one through here. .735. Once you get this set, you can just take off and go. It takes a little bit to get set up. That's why I like to run everything in batches. I also need to clean my insert there. I got some pitch on it and it's making these stick. There we go, 0.725. Now we can go ahead and run the rest of them. And I'm not going to keep the video running while I'm doing that. It'd be a little boring. But I'll go and I'll run every one of these on one end. I'll be back after I get done with that. And I got to clean my pitch off. Okay, once all those are cut, you should have a stack of blocks with dado cut in one end. You should have a flat bottom, which bring up a little point here. A couple things. It's important to have a tall fence. I wouldn't even attempt this with the stock fence, even though I do have a good Vega fence on here. I added this addition on, especially when you're doing the deeper ones. You want to have something that gets up against so you're not tipping. Because that very easily make it kick back at you, even though we're making a shallow cut. Another thing I should mention, you may have noticed, is I never stand directly behind the blade. I'm always off to one side. in case there is something that kicks back, and I have had a few things kick before. It goes that way and it doesn't bop me in the top of the head. Had that happen before too. That's School of Hard Knocks. You learn that stuff. Okay, while we're on the subject of dadu cuts, I'm going to show you what not to buy if you don't have a dadu set. You can buy this Mybro set pretty cheap. Yeah, 40 bucks, $39.95 when it's on sale. It's okay for doing utility work where it's not going to be seen or where tolerances aren't real close, and it's not important to have a good flat cut on the bottom. Here is, hopefully this will focus in. I can get this up close enough. You see we got a nice flat cut. I'm not using the Mybro, I'm using an Ashland brand, and I also do not make the entire 3/4 inch wide cut at once. I could, if I needed to do thousands of these, I probably would. This lets me get a little bit more accurate with reversing it on both sides and making sure that both of these end up absolutely identical. There shouldn't be a difference, but it's just the way I like to do it. Next I'm going to get set up and we'll be cutting the notch for the other end. That'll be 7/8 of an inch wide. So let me get set up here and I'll be back. Okay, for the next step, we're going to be cutting this one, the dadu for the top bar. This needs to be 7/8 of an inch wide. You'll have 1/4 inch stock on each side, and it needs to be 7/16 of an inch deep. I have my dadu set up still for the other one, so I'm going to have to make 3 passes. If I had a whole ton of these to do, I'd put a wider stack in so I could do it in 2. But this won't take all that long. You may notice something else I did was I make a black mark on the bottom all the way through here, and I'll show you why in a little while. This is also from the School of Hard Knocks. It kind of helps you from screwing up when you're cutting the bevels on them. But we'll get this set up here and we'll make a couple passes and we'll test for depth and width. Perfect. And we're perfect there. This should be a 1/4 inch and it's 0.258. Yeah, it's just a little more, but yeah, this was 0.248. 0.24. I guess it depends on where you read on it, but it's close enough. But as you can see, I'll have to make one more pass and go down through and knock that center out. After I run through all these, I'll just move the fence a little bit and run through and knock that out. It'll also make for a very nice flat dadu base. So we'll get these cut and then I'll be back and I'll show you how we do the bevels on each side. Okay, we got all our dadus cut. Top one, bottom one, got the bottoms marked. The next thing we need to do is to cut this little taper down here. And what we need to do is remove 1/8 of an inch from each side. And the ideal thing to do this on, at least for me, is a little benchtop joiner. There's no sense of bringing out the big joiner for this, so a benchtop one works just fine. And I'll get that set up here and I'll show you how that works. Okay, for this portion we're going to be cutting the bevels down here on the bottom. I've already done one as kind of a test, and as you can see, it matches up perfect. The way I have this is a little benchtop joiner. I've got 2 lines here, one for mediums, one for deeps. That line is for a whole other project, so kind of ignore that one. I have this set to take 1/8 inch off in one pass, And I'll show you how this works, and be aware between the dust collector and this joiner, it's loud. This is also where I put these marks on the bottom here so that I don't put the wrong end in. I always set this in so that the marks go in first. That way I know I'm doing the bottom and not the top, and because I have done them backwards before, so avoids making those mistakes. And it's just like that. If this, what I'm doing here, if this freaks you out or you think this is too dangerous, by all means don't attempt it. I've been working with this stuff for over 40 years, so I'm highly experienced with it. Yes, I know that a lot of people would put a grip block on the top and they wouldn't have their hand in front, but I'm very well aware of where my hands are. I know what can happen. Sleeves are buttoned. Don't ever work around a joiner with sleeves hanging down or anything flopping around, because if it grabs, it'll pull you right in. So I'll go ahead and cut the rest of these, and then the last step would be to rip them down, and I'll be back when we're ready to do that. Okay, we got all of our blocks cut down to the rough size and the rough shape. So the last step of this is to cut these down into 3/8 inch thick slices this way. And to do that, set your fence 3/8 of an inch away from the blade. Strongly suggest you use a rip blade and not a general purpose or a cross. Don't use a crosscut blade. You'll be forever trying to do this. A rip blade will give you the quickest and smoothest cut and won't tax your saw as much. If you've got an underpowered saw, thin kerf blade's a plus. I have a high-powered one. It's 3 horsepower, but I still use a thin kerf blade here, because it lets me get usually 1 or 2 more frames out of a block. So there's no sense in taking that extra wide kerf in this case. But another thing you'll want to think about getting if you don't have one or never heard of it, it's this thing here. It's called a gripper. It's by Microjig. Try to get this closer to the camera. These are adjustable. And this one here will be riding along the fence. This one here will be riding on top of the stock. And where the blade sticks up is right in this little portion right here. This is all adjustable. This is a great invention. I think they're a little overpriced for what they are, but it's got to be one of the top safety tools for use on a table saw. If you don't have one and you've got a table saw, I suggest you go out and get one. They're available a lot of the big box stores, and of course Amazon has them. But I'll show you how we cut a couple of these, and we'll go from there. Okay, and that's how we make end frames, or end bars, whichever you want to call them. Right there. Of course, you'll have a cutoff at the end, which will be a reject. And of course, I haven't cut this up yet, but you'll see that this has a big knot in it. It's a loose knot on top of it. So the 2 pieces right there, those will be rejects. unless you happen to get lucky and just get a whole bunch of just clear wood like this, you'll have a few knots. So I always make way more end bars, top bars, bottom bars, more than I need, because I know there's going to be some rejects. There again, before I end this part 1 of 2 videos, I want to stress safety. If you feel uncomfortable doing any of these operations, then don't do it. Either just buy your frames or find somebody else to do it for you. Don't take any chances. And the other thing you want to make sure you don't do is become complacent. As I was running these on the joiner, of course I was paying very close attention to what I was doing, where my hands were, but I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to my dust collector. I didn't notice that it got full, so when it got full, all the chips went out the end, and I had a huge mess on the floor and every place else. But yeah, you want to keep aware of your surroundings too. That was kind of a dumb thing on my part to not check the dust collector first. But anyway, this is the end of part 1. On part 2, we'll do the top bars and the bottom bars. The bottom bars are very easy. Top bars are a whole lot more complex, and is a spot where a lot of people decide to just buy their frames. But I've got a little bit of a system for making them, and we'll get into those in the next video, and I hope to get it done the next day or 2. Thanks for watching, and if you like this, please hit that thumbs up button and subscribe. Thanks.